Good afternoon. I hope coffee from the coffee break is kicking in. As a moderator, my job is to flash the 5-minute card for the speaker, but I would like to flash the 5-minute cards for all those people who are outside as an audience that you're 5 minutes late. I'm a interventional pain management specialist practicing in Tampa, and I will be moderating today's afternoon session. As a physician, whether we are practicing interventional pain medicine, in anesthesiology, internal medicine, emergency medicine, no matter what we practice, safety is always a prime concern for us. So in the arena of practicing with the cannabinoids, how does the safety come about and how it is implemented? That the basic fundamentals of the safety we'll be learning from Jini Glaros, who is the Chief Science Officer at Modern Canna Labs. Jini Glaros.
Hi everyone, welcome. So today's presentation will be a little different than what you have probably learned earlier throughout the day because we're going to do an overview of testing regulations. So I just want to start by asking how many of you in the audience are familiar with the testing regulations and requirements in Florida for cannabis products? Not many. Okay, so this is going to be great. It's going to be a really nice overview so that you can understand what goes into testing and how products get to market. So first up, let's just talk about what is a cannabis testing lab. Ultimately, a cannabis testing lab is going to be a third-party testing provider that tests products containing cannabis. And one of the really important parts about this is that because Florida is a vertically integrated system, the labs are who are responsible for ensuring that the product is truly safe. When you have a vertically integrated system, the producer cultivates, they manufacture, they process, they retail. They do everything from start to finish. So ultimately, you need someone to hold those cultivators and producers accountable to ensure that the product that patients are getting are truly safe for human consumption. And that's ultimately what we as a laboratory are here to do. And so we're ensuring that those products are meeting those necessary regulatory standards. And when we talk about regulatory standards, we're talking about, does it meet label claim? Does it have any pesticides? Does it have any microbials? Does it have any heavy metals? And we're going to dive into a lot of that today and review all of those different testing parameters. We also certify the label claims that are listed on the packaging. So as physicians, when you're recommending, not prescribing, when you're recommending cannabis and a patient is going to use 10 milligram edibles, are those edibles really 10 milligrams? And that's what the laboratory is here to do. We're here to test that product and say, yes, is there 10 milligrams of THC or CBD or CBN, whatever cannabinoid we're putting in there, does it match? And if it doesn't, what do we need to do to correct that? And so in doing this, we use a lot of different instrumentation in order to perform this testing. So what are the types of testing that laboratories can do? And so this is a pretty generalized overview of the various testing that labs can do and labs are offering. And I want to note that anything in blue is required testing by the state of Florida, and anything in green is additional testing that can be done. And we're going to talk a lot about these more in depth, so I'm not going to go through the full list with you right now, but I do want to point out on the bottom of this PowerPoint slide, you'll see that we have flower derivatives and edibles. And this is how the state has broken apart the different types of testing that laboratories do. So laboratories have 3 categories of matrices, primary matrices that they're testing for. And within those matrices, there's a lot of different product types. So when we're talking about flower, we're talking about whole flower, we're talking about pre-rolls, keef. All of those are flower products. You then have your derivative products. These are products that are made from cannabis flower. So those can be capsules, they can be tinctures, they can be vapes, shatters, isolate, waxes, butters. There's an endless number of derivative products and there's new products coming to the market every single day. And then we have our edible products, and those are the products that are going to be consumed orally, and that's going to be your gummies, your brownies, your hard candies, your drink powders. Those sorts of products are classified as edibles. And the laboratories have different requirements for testing each of these product types. So first up, we're going to talk about the cannabinoid and terpene testing and how that is done. So cannabinoids and terpenes, they're what most people know. They're what are familiar. So your cannabinoids give you that potency, as it's referred to, even though in terminology speaking, we call it potency, but it's not truly potency because potency actually includes your terpenes and your flavonoids as well. But for the simplicity of how the state refers to it, we're going to refer to it as potency. And so then you have your terpenes, and that gives a lot of that smell and that flavor and that aroma to cannabis. And we test that as well. Interestingly, terpenes are not required in the state of Florida for testing, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit on a couple slides. So first up is going to be potency testing, so those cannabinoid testing, and that's done using high-performance liquid chromatography primarily. And so what are we doing here? Ultimately, we are determining the concentration of cannabinoids that exist in the sample. And in the state of Florida, laboratories are required to look at 11 different cannabinoids, plus a total THC and a total CBD calculation. And how are we doing this? We're ultimately taking the sample and we're extracting and diluting it, and then we're using the HPLC to separate, identify, and quantify the cannabinoids that are present in the sample. And depending on the sample type, there's gonna be different preparations and different processes that the laboratory has to go through. And laboratories need to be validating those methods. And if you have more questions, we can definitely, this is a quick overview, there's a lot more information that we could cover on this, so I would be happy to talk to you after. And ultimately, why are we doing this? As a laboratory, what is the purpose? And the purpose is really to ensure that the label claim matches and that patients are receiving proper information about their products. I'm sure many of you in this room have heard about potency inflation and the struggles of what that is and what that means. And so really laboratories need to be doing their best to provide the most accurate numbers possible so that the patients know what they're getting. Because at the end of the day, you as a physician cannot properly dose your patient if you don't know what is actually in that product. Then we have the terpenes. So as I mentioned, terpenes are not required, so they're an optional test. I will say that almost every medical marijuana treatment center in Florida tests for terpenes, but the state is unable to regulate those, and that's because they're not mentioned anywhere in statute. So those of you who are into lobbying and a lobbyist, I highly recommend you push for terpenes because terpenes are an important part of this. They have a lot of medicinal benefits, and we need to have accurate numbers. And you will see that laboratories do tend to neglect the terpene testing. They don't scrutinize their data as much because it's not a required analysis, and it's not analysis they can get in trouble for. So what are we doing with terpenes? We're determining the concentration of terpenes that are present in that sample. You'll notice that flower is probably going to have anywhere from as low as 0.5% to about 4%. When we're talking about vape cartridges, they can have anywhere from 4% to probably 10%, depending on how those terpenes are being spiked in. Edibles, this is a fun debate because terpenes are added into edibles, but terpenes normally don't end up in edibles in the final product. And that's because terpenes are volatile compounds, which means that as you produce those edibles, all of those terpenes are being cooked out, or they're being added in at a concentration that's not detectable by the laboratory. And in order to determine the terpene concentration, we're again extracting and diluting the samples, and we're using methylene chloride as our solvent for this, and then we're analyzing them using GCMS, or gas chromatography with mass spectrometry, to separate and quantify those terpenes. And ultimately, why are we doing this? Again, we're providing consumers with information regarding the aroma or the flavor of the product, and also some of those pharmacological attributes that that product will possess. So certain terpenes provide certain therapeutic benefits. So if a consumer does not know what those terpenes are, and those terpenes are not accurately provided to them, they may not know which product they want to purchase and which product will be the most helpful for them. With that, we're going to transition into contaminant testing. So the state of Florida requires a wide array of contaminant testing, and this is a list of those contaminants. And on the next several slides, we're going to talk about each of these individually. So first up is going to be agricultural agents, and agricultural agents are tested using two different instruments. So we're first using gas chromatography with tandem mass spectrometry, or GCMS-MS, and we're determining if there are any potential toxic pesticides, fungicide, plant growth regulators, or any sort of agricultural agent that has been added. Does that remain in the final product? And in order to do this, similar to what we're doing with all of the others, we have to extract those from the sample. So we'll extract them and dilute them accordingly, and then we'll use the gas chromatogram with the tandem mass spectrometer to identify and quantify. And it's important to note that with this, you do have to utilize two different instruments, and that's because some of the pesticides that are required in Florida are thermally liable, which means if you do not heat them, you will not be able to accurately see them. So we have to utilize both instruments. Labs get a little frustrated sometimes because you have to get both of those instruments and they're not cheap, but it's for safety purposes because those 5 pesticides that are mainly analyzed via GC are pretty dangerous pesticides. They're pesticides such as chloridane, which was banned in the 1980s, but has a half-life of about 35 years, so it's gonna exist for a pretty long time. And ultimately, cannabis is grown sometimes partially outdoors, or it's grown in greenhouses, and it's exposed to pests, which then means it's exposed to agricultural agents. And so we need to ensure that that is not carrying over into the product. The other problem with these agricultural agents is when you extract a sample, so say it's on your flower at low concentrations, and you extract that flower and turn it into a distillate, the pesticides don't go away, they stay. They concentrate down just like your cannabinoids. And so now consumers are being put at a higher risk. The other way we're looking at those agricultural agents is going to be using liquid chromatography with tandem mass spectrometry. And this is going to be a very similar principle of how we're performing the analysis, but we're just using liquid chromatography to separate rather than gas. So these are not thermally liable. We don't have to heat them up, so we can separate them using only liquid chromatography. Again, it's pretty much the same principle of why we're having to do this testing, is because we want to ensure that these agricultural agents are not present in levels that would be dangerous to the consumer, to your patients. Next up is going to be heavy metals, and these are analyzed via ion-coupled plasma with mass spectrometry, and this is going to ultimately determine if there's any heavy metals in the product that would exist in levels that could be toxic to humans. And so in the state of Florida, we're required to test for 4 heavy metals currently: arsenic, cadmium, lead, and mercury. However, the state does have proposed rules that are adding tin and nickel to the list of heavy metals that we will be testing for. So once that happens, there will be 6. I foresee in the future more and more heavy metals will get added, especially as we learn about what could be in vape cartridges. And for this, we're using acid digestion in order to get the samples into solution before running them on the ICP-MS. And fun fact about cannabis, it's a bioaccumulator, which means when you give it something like metals, it likes the metals and it will survive in the metals. So whereas most plants would die in high concentration of heavy metals, cannabis flourishes and it sucks up those heavy metals, it absorbs them, and then at high concentrations, you now have a problem. Metals also translocate very interestingly through the plant, and we've started to do some research on this translocation and how this uptake can occur and how this uptake can happen. Additionally, vape cartridges have been known to leach heavy metals. So if you are not testing for heavy metals in final product packaging, which we'll talk a little bit about at the end of the presentation, you may never know if a product contains heavy metals that could be dangerous to the patient. So things like leachability studies, so producers working with labs to ensure that their vape cartridges are not going to leach heavy metals over time, is an important part of the R&D process before getting to final product testing. Then we have microbials. Microbials are fun because they're living. And they are pesky little organisms, and they do not behave naturally. And so what we're doing here is we're using qPCR, so quantitative polymerase chain reaction, or culture-based testing to test for these. And these are determining if there are any pathogenic microbial species that exist in a product that could be dangerous for human consumption. And so with this, we're using various different microbial techniques, including the qPCR, the culture-based method, to determine if microbes are present, and in some instances, quantify those microbes. So in the state of Florida, we're testing for Salmonella, we're testing for Shiga toxin E. coli, we're testing for Aspergillus and 4 specific species of Aspergillus Aspergillus flavus, fumigatus, niger, and terris, as well as testing for total yeast and mold. Total yeast and mold is a fun debate that we can have offline about what goes on with total yeast and mold testing. But for total yeast and mold testing, we are quantifying that. So we have to give a specific concentration of the yeast and mold that's present in that sample. And when we think about these sort of pesky little microbes, we're thinking about they exist everywhere. So they're bound to be added at different points in the production process. So we need to ensure that if a product is exposed to microbials, it's not exposed to something dangerous. It's not exposed to something that could make people sick. We know that Aspergillus can cause things like aspergillosis, and we don't want to see that in patients. So how do we ensure that that is not in our product? We test the product before it makes it to market. Next is going to be mycotoxins. Mycotoxins are tested for using liquid chromatography with tandem mass spectrometry, and mycotoxins are going to be the secondary metabolites of microbials. So Aspergillus, which is a type of mold, will create mycotoxins, and then you have a flower, you send the flower to the lab fails the flower for Aspergillus, and then a producer can turn that into an extract. What is the problem with that? The problem with that could be that if those microbials formed mycotoxins before the extraction process, those mycotoxins will not go away. They'll simply be concentrated down. Mycotoxins are extremely dangerous. Florida has regulatory limits of 20 ppb, so 20 parts per million for these mycotoxins. We have to see to extremely low levels, which is great. We're protecting the consumer, but we need to make sure labs are also able to do this testing and do this testing accurately, so that we can ensure safety. So with this, we're extracting those samples and then analyzing them on the LC-MS. This is an extraction that can go along with our pesticide extraction. So those agricultural agents, you can actually do those extractions at once and then divide the sample up and run it for both pesticides and for mycotoxins. So with this, as I mentioned, it's really important for those products that are turned into extracts that may have failed as flour, because that's where those mycotoxins are coming from and being formed. Next up is going to be residual solvents. So residual solvents are tested using gas chromatography with mass spectrometry. And what are residual solvents? Residual solvents are going to be those solvent byproducts that may remain after the extraction and production process. So in order to turn cannabis flower into cannabis extract, you normally have to use some sort of a solvent. A lot of times people are using BHO extractions or ethanol extractions, distillations to do that. So we want to make sure that none of those remain. So when we talk about BHO, we're talking about butane, hexane, a lot of those propane, a lot of those different hydrocarbons that are used to extract, and those can be dangerous. Solvents are classified as 3 different classes, class 1, 2, and 3, and the class will tell you how dangerous it is. And the state of Florida has done a really great job of setting the limits based on the danger of the class of solvents. So things like benzene, benzene bad is what we're going to just always, benzene bad, has a very low regulatory limit. And we want to ensure that those solvents do not somehow end up in the process, because ultimately packaging could leach solvents. We've seen it. It is terrifying, but we have seen it as a laboratory. So we need to be sure that that is not making it into the product, and then the consumer is not inhaling that. We don't want people who are using a vape cartridge inhaling any sort of solvent. So these samples are prepared using a headspace injection. So with this, we weigh up a very small amount of sample into the bottom of a 20 ml headspace vial, and then that headspace vial goes into an oven and equilibrates to a very specific temperature for a specific amount of time. And once we do that, all of those solvents now have turned into a gas, and they're in the headspace of that vial. And so once they're in the headspace of that vial, fully equilibrated, a needle will come and puncture that vial, and then all of those solvents that were present in that sample will make its way through the GC column to the mass spec where we can detect it. And with this, you know, the exposure to these solvents can be dangerous to consumer health. And since they are used in the production process, we need to ensure they're being fully removed, or removed to a point that is a safe level. And that's where a lot of this debate comes from. What is the safe level? How much is safe to consume? How much is just, you know, artifact from the laboratory? We've seen a lot of conversation on things like LinkedIn talking about solvents and solvents that remain in products that are solventless. Well, where is those solvents coming from? Are they just byproducts? Are they artifacts from the laboratory? These are all questions and conversations regulators, laboratories, and producers need to be having together. So what is the additional testing we can offer? I'm not going to go super in-depth this testing. However, I did want to give you a brief overview, and I do want to talk about the first three because those are 3 tests that are required by the state of Florida. So first up being water activity, and water activity is going to tell you the amount of free water that is present in a sample. What does free water mean? Free water means how likely is it to grow a microbial? So what happens? A cultivator or producer packages something and sends it to the lab the very next day. Well, the lab tests it, and at that time, it doesn't have yeast and mold. However, if it has a high water activity, guess what? It goes to the shelf, and your patient doesn't buy it for 4 weeks, and your patient opens it, and now it's full of mold. That happened because it had too much free water present. So the state has set water activity limits that help ensure that that does not happen. It helps ensure that any products that make it to the shelf have a low enough water activity that microbial growth should not be able to occur as long as the product is stored properly. And this is where conversations with patients also need to happen after purchasing. After purchasing, patients need to be storing their products correctly because if they don't, they could be allowing moisture to get into these samples, humidity to get into these samples, and then they could have microbial growth. And the sample could be fine at the time of purchase, but the way that it was stored by the patient could lead to problems. So this is where patient education about some of these different tests becomes very, very important. Next is going to be moisture. Most people hear water activity and free water and they think that's moisture. That's not moisture. Moisture is going to be the total water that's in the sample. And moisture is fun in cannabis because cannabis has a lot of volatile compounds. And so typical moisture methods for determining that concentration are not really applicable to cannabis. And our laboratory recently conducted a very, very large study on this, understanding what the true moisture content is in cannabis flower on the Florida market. And I highly encourage you to look up my LinkedIn to see more information about that because while we all have been taught and educated that cannabis is 10 to 14% moisture, cannabis is more like 5 to 8% moisture. So why is that? That's because volatiles are being lost when people are drying these samples to determine that moisture content. And then finally is homogeneity. So how many of you have ever gone, out west where this sort of testing is not required and you go into a recreational market and you buy, some gummies and you eat one gummy and you feel nothing and you eat another gummy and you are in outer space? It is because homogeneity testing was not done. So Florida has been really great in the fact that they require laboratories to do homogeneity testing on all edible products. So when we get an edible product in, whether that be a chocolate bar, whether that be 10 cookies in a bag or 10 gummies in a bag, we have to randomly test each of those, or 2 to 3 from each bag, and make sure that the THC or CBD or CBN concentration is what the producer said it is supposed to be. And this helps ensure consumer safety. This helps ensure dosing. When you are telling your patient to start low and go slow and eat, only half of a gummy at a time, you need to know confidently that you're telling them to eat 5 milligrams. And so without this sort of testing, that's not going to be done. So this homogeneity testing is one of, I think, most important testing for edible products that is done. In addition to the contaminant testing, of course, this is going to ensure that they're getting what you're telling them they're getting. Next up is going to be additional testing that is just kind of add-ons for the laboratory to do. And so again, I don't really have much time to go through this because I want to talk about some of the Florida-specific regulations, but if you have questions about any of this testing, I would be happy to answer any questions after on that. So let's talk about some Florida-specific testing requirements. So I have some rules listed here. You may have heard from other presenters that Florida is still operating under emergency rules for a lot of things, and the laboratories are definitely still operating under emergency rules. And so with those emergency rules, we are having to do specific things that have been written into those regulations. And these are some of the specifics. There are about 25 pages of rules, so we definitely do not have time to cover all of them. However, I do want to cover some of the big hitters. And so the first is going to be 64 ER 20-14 states that laboratories must receive a certification from the OMMU and that they must maintain an ISO 1725 2017 accreditation information to conduct testing. This is an important part of ensuring that the laboratories are competent and capable of performing the testing that they're doing. If laboratories are just testing willy-nilly and they don't have this sort of a certification, you may have problems. They may not know what they're doing. They may not have the proper skills, the proper documentation, the proper quality management systems to ensure that their data is accurate. Next is going to be in 64 ER 20-7. While there are no specific required protocols, so there's no standardized methods that are required currently, the OMMU does have to approve all laboratory SOPs for each of the labs. And so this is important because cannabis is new. There's not a ton of standardized methods available, but at least we do have someone looking at these methods, providing oversight, providing recommendations, and ensuring that the labs are also following those SOPs that they are writing internally. Next is going to be 64 ER 20-38, and this is that products must be tested in final product packaging, and the samples must be collected at random by the laboratory. There are a lot of states that allow producers to send in their own samples, and samples are not sent in after they've been packaged. This is a problem because samples can change. Contaminants can be added in the process. Packaging can leach contaminants. So we need to ensure that what the patient is getting is what we are testing. And so Florida has done a really great job of implementing that rule, and while it can be a pain for the laboratories because sometimes we're bringing back 50 vape cartridges that we have to break into and empty and composite and turn into one homogenized sample, it is so important for patient safety and for giving patients true, accurate information about the product that they are getting and the product they are consuming. Then we have 64 ER 20-39, which says that if a product has a label claim, there is a specific variance that is allowed, and if the product does not meet that specification, it must be failed by the laboratory. So edibles have a 15% variance, which means if you label your edible as 10 milligrams, it has to test out between 8.5 and 11.5, and if it doesn't, the laboratory has to fail that. You have to either relabel the product if it is less, or if it is more, you have to destroy the product because there is a cap on those edibles. Also with tinctures, with capsules, all of those formulated products, there is a requirement. In those formulated products, you get a 10% variance. So if you're labeling them as 100 milligrams, they need to be between 90 and 110, or the laboratory has to fail it. And then the last two that I want to briefly touch on is 64 ER 20-39 and 64 4 212, and that's if a product fails compliance testing, the laboratory has to notify the OMMU within 24 hours. However, the caveat to that is after the OMMU has been notified, a producer can send the product for retesting. So it has to go through 2 compliance testing tests, complete compliance tests again, and if it passes both of those compliance tests, it can go to market. While this is great for the producers because if a laboratory produced inaccurate results, they can still get product to market, it does sometimes put consumers at risk because we are in a business and MMTCs want to get product to market, labs want to get business. You do risk that because products can go to a completely different lab than originally analyzed that sample, there is a chance that people could be doing things they shouldn't to get product to market. So that's just something that we do need to take into consideration. I think retesting is a great option, but in my personal opinion, retesting should be at the same lab that originally tested the product. That way, if it was an inaccuracy or something that went wrong at that lab can correct that and show a corrective action rather than just being allowed to send it somewhere else and hopefully get that product to market. So finally, cannabis labs, the impact. Ultimately, we are responsible for ensuring that product is being sold is safe for human consumption. We're also necessary in both recreational and medicinal markets. Ultimately, we want to ensure whether a consumer is consuming medicinally or recreationally that they're consuming safely. And with that, providing that accurate information regarding the potency of products is super important for dosing. Patients cannot accurately dose if they do not have the accurate and correct information about the THC content in their products. And then we're also able to offer insight and understanding about the cannabis plant. And just to wrap things up, cannabis the future. Ultimately, more industry research is needed for industry growth. We need to be doing research. We need to be pushing the industry forward. It is important to note that educational programs are beginning to recognize cannabis and hemp as part of their curriculum. I actually have a master's in medical cannabis science and therapeutics from the University of Maryland. It's the first program of its kind, and it allows the students to get a master's degree where they're able to merge their understanding of the pharmacological, the analytical, analytical, all aspects of cannabis. Additionally, cannabis will eventually be descheduled and or legalized nationally, and we have to think about what that is going to do for the future and the future of laboratories and cultivators. And then finally, states will transition to having recreational programs. However, there will still be a need for the medical programs, and that's an important part to remember, is we need to ensure that consumer and patient safety with that. And I have definitely run out of time, so thank you.
In the interest of time, it is best that we save our questions at the end. I request everyone to write down the question, and over course of this session, if you can think through your question and refine it in such a way so that it not only benefits you, but it also benefits others in the audience and creates inquisitiveness in answering your questions among the panel members. Now, being an interventional pain physician, we use Botox many a times, and patient asks us at the end of the therapy, hey, can that leftover Botox, can you use it to treat my wrinkles on my face? Or similarly, down the road in the medical cannabis practice, if patient asks, hey, can I use my cannabis for some cosmetic purpose? If you face that question, Dr. Gregory Smith is here to enlighten you why that question came about. Dr. Smith?
Thank you. How do I do this? Just that, just the green button? Yes, I think so. Okay, we'll find out. Yeah, I'm not a cosmetic doctor. I'm actually board certified in preventive medicine. And most of my interaction with cannabinoids has been in research. I have 1 or 2 research projects going on at any one time. I was originally trained 24 years ago in California on how to use cannabis to treat patients. But obviously my career has taken a different track. I'm talking about cosmetic uses in the hair and skin in humans. So for over 600 million years, since the first chordated fish, we have had an endocannabinoid system. That system has basically stayed fairly similar in most respects, both in function and structure, for those millions of years and through millions of species. So every species since those chordated fish have an endocannabinoid system. This system is so effective that it is the most common receptor in our brain. So we have more receptors for cannabinoids than we do for serotonin, dopamine, acetylcholine. It's the second most common receptor system within the body. And so when we look at the skin and the hair follicles, we see tons of CB1 and CB2 receptors at specific places in the skin and hair follicle. So what has happened as the research keeps coming out, we're at well over 35,000 publications are now at the clinical trials or other phases of publications of endocannabinoid, mostly basic science research. We found out there's some cosmetic effects, and we know why. These receptors sitting there in certain places in the skin and hair follicles can be manipulated to have very positive therapeutic effects, and I'd like you to all realize what we're finding out rather quickly. So the endocannabinoid system, traditionally when we listen to Dr. Rousseau and others, we know it is involved with, let's see if I can get this right. Eat, sleep, relax, protect, forget. So those are the 5 elements I've heard since I first trained of the endocannabinoid system. What does it impact? Well, it also impacts metabolism, and that's part of those 5, but it's really, it is a homeostatic mechanism for our metabolism. We have a paper that just came out last month using THCV for weight loss and to improve metabolic biomarkers. So quite a lot of good improvement in biomarkers with using just THCV isolate. So you'll be hearing more about that, but this is about cosmetics. So what it also has to do with thermoregulation, so homeostasis of thermoregulation. For example, if that half of the audience doesn't smoke pot at all, and this half smokes a lot of pot, your average temperature is about 1 degree different. They're about 1 degree less than you, just through the effects of having THC in your body. So it's affecting you, your thermoregulation and your metabolism. So that's going to get into some of the things we're talking about here when we get to cosmetic effects. So we have CB1 and CB2 receptors on different cells. When you're in the, I'm talking about the skin at the moment, when we're in the epidermis, then we have predominantly keratinocytes. And so we have a lot of absorption. When we're trying to get anything fat-soluble into the dermis, we have to go through the epidermis, and those keratinocytes are excellent at blocking absorption. They're barriers, our barrier part of the skin. And so that we have seen, and you'll hear in a minute, that we can treat some conditions in the epidermis, psoriasis and eczema, because of those receptors, the CB2 receptors. But where we really want to get down to is into the dermis, where there's a lot of endocannabinoid system functions that have to do with differentiation, proliferation, and apoptosis. So very important functions are happening underneath the epidermis, down in the dermis. Traditionally, as long as I've been in this practice, we have been using CBD for its anti-inflammatory effects. So psoriasis, eczema, acne, those are the 3 conditions I think you'll find plenty of papers on that we can use CBD to treat that. And so that's its anti-inflammatory effect. But we weren't thinking of its pro-regenerative effect. So we know the anti-inflammatory effect, but what about the pro-regenerative effect? Well, unless we can get the CBD past the epidermis, we can't get this regenerative processes going on. So why is that important? Because solar elastosis occurs in the dermis. This is deep furrowed wrinkles, thickened skin. Every product that is currently out there cosmetically talks about reducing the appearance of fine lines and wrinkles. Those are changes that occur in the epidermis. So we've got all sorts of things, vitamin C and retinoids, that work quite nicely on fine lines and wrinkles. The only thing that works on deep wrinkles and furrowed, aged, thickened skin is cold laser and some other very intense procedures. There's no medication out there to work on these deep lines. Before I get into the research, we also know that cannabinoids are antioxidant and are anti-UV adverse effects. So there's lots of things already we know we can use CBD for, especially in the anti-aging area. And this research has not been published yet. It's been submitted for publication, and it was completed about 6 months ago, and the paper was just recently submitted. So I can't say too much other than point out a couple numbers here. Do I have a pointer on here? Is it that little guy? Oh, yeah, yep. Okay. So this was a dermatologist's office in Clearwater who saw my research on hair, which you'll hear about later, and came running up to me after that I presented that paper, and she says, I think we can do something in the skin, not just on the hair follicle, but in the deep skin, the dermis. So we ran this study. It was a phase 2A trial, and again, it's been submitted for publication. We worked with a very esteemed derm pathologist over at UCF Medical Center, or not UCF, USF, yeah, Medical Center. And so here we are. We have 40 patients. They're mature or elderly patients in a dermatology practice with skin changes consistent with solar elastosis. So we see before in the dark at the bottom here. Almost everyone was severe and just one moderate or 1 or 2 moderate. And after 90 days of use of a highly penetrative CBD topical, so it's once a day CBD topical that has been modified so it penetrates past the epidermis. And look at these effects. They're just remarkable. The p-values are way out there. The same thing here. This. Not only as we age do we get this thickened, furrowed skin, but we get a lot more vascularity apparent. And so the pathologist looked at vascularity. So all of our patients had moderate to mild, and they all had 0 on the rating scale after. So quite an interesting, and hopefully we'll be seeing a lot more research and have other places reproduce our study. The hair follicles, someone in the audience here reminded me that last time he heard me talk about hair follicles, this research is about 3 years old. I had a full head of hair. I'm not as young as I used to be, so I have my dollar store hair dye, and my sister saw me at Thanksgiving, and my hair was probably orange, like some future candidates. She shaved my head, and I'm not going back. I kind of like it. So, so even though I'm going to talk about hair regrowth, I'm bald. The hair follicle, I really love the hair follicle. I'm way into. I've done 2 studies with hair follicles, and it all happened 6 years ago, where I was at an international conference of the Cannabis Research Society, Cannabinoid Research Society, and someone did a paper on noticing rodent hair stopped growing when you put THC on it. It was just sort of an anecdotal finding, a very small paper, and that was enough to get me thinking, well, what's going on? And so after doing enough research, we did our first paper with CBD only, because we didn't have THCV. A few years ago, we could not get THCV. It was $80,000 a kilo. But we could get CBD, and I think we all know that CBD is an allosteric modulator, a negative allosteric modulator of the CB1 receptor. So it doesn't actually interact inside the receptor. It goes on the outside of this receptor and pulls it apart slightly so that anything doesn't attach as well. So it just makes it a less good attachment. That's all CBD does at the CB1 receptor. But it's something. It's a partial CB1 blocker. And that's all we had 3 or 4 years ago. We got 94% increased hair growth after 6 months, which is a little bit better than Rogaine. Rogaine's about 80%. So we got a little bit better regrowth than Rogaine with CBD. And then only a couple years ago, THCV became available in an oil from China. And so we have a high THCV, CBDV oil, and we use that in our study, and I think I'm going to be showing you the study results of that. So just so we know, we're going to, the THCV topical is going to be put on the skin. It's going to literally physically follow down the follicle. There's no absorption with this particular, when we did the study, it was physically designed so that it was really thin and watery-like and able to follow down the follicle. So the product just follows down the follicle, and it blocks the CB1 receptor, the exact opposite of THC. So, and it is a neutral, full blocker of the CB1 receptor, that's THCV. So what happened? Let me see if I might have just had to, here's some of the pictures. So this was 90 days of the product. I co-authored this paper with the doctor that did the original Rogaine and the original Propecia research. And he called me from his office about 6 weeks into the study. He goes, our patients look like chia pets. This is the guy that invented Propecia and Rogaine, so it meant a lot to me. So this was we had about 265% increase in hair growth at 90 days. No dropouts, almost no adverse effects. We're putting hemp oil on someone's head. It's good. These are just some classic examples. We had 41 patients, I think, in this study. So then what do? We said, well, if we can make the hair grow by blocking the CB1 receptor, maybe we can make the hair not grow, and cosmetically on the sideburns and the lips that are important. But we'd have to use THC, and that is not going to fly. We cannot have a THC topical product because it's just a pain in the butt. What can we use? We learned earlier HHC. HHC is a CBD-derived 2018 Farm Act substance, cheap. We know what it does. We know how it metabolizes. So I used HHC analog. The problem with this study is unfunded. Like most of my studies are unfunded. I do them for fun, so they're fun, but they're not funded. No big pharma here. So we only had about eight or 10 people, but the only other product, when we did our research before we designed this study, there's only one chemical out there that has been shown at all to have any reduction of hair growth. So we were competing with nothing, basically. There was one product that was shown in like 8 males to decrease hair growth by 30%. That's the only competition to anything to block hair growth. So we had some nice results. This is anecdotal. This is not a study. This is anecdotal, but it needs to be done in a more proper fashion and with some funding. But we had the 8 or so people that were happy with the results, and we had some magnification showing reduction. Was the reduction 50%? I don't know. But it suggests it needs to be further researched. And it's consistent with what we know. When you stimulate the CB1 receptor, the hair shaft elongates and the matrix cells start making more matrix. So the shaft gets thicker. So you get a thicker, longer hair that has a longer active growth phase. So all 3 of those functions are part of the endocannabinoid system. So the CB1 is for shaft elongation, matrix cell production, and then TRPV for the duration of the hair growth, how long it grows before it dies. So there's definitely some stuff here with people with some money and some research departments to see what we can do here. So I think this is consistent with what I just talked about. Let's talk about future directions. And I think we're in a very exciting time now with the Schedule 3 opportunity, which is probably going to become manifest sometime this fall. So we will now, every doctor in this country will be able to literally write a prescription for THC. Now, will that have to be paid for by the insurance company? Probably not. They'll probably be going to dispensaries in the same place they've been going right now to get THC products. But it will be something every doctor can use. And with the sort of research coming on down, we're going to want to have a bunch of new products, especially these more natural products, available to all these doctors. They're not us. We've been doing this. We're the docs doing the cards and doing the research, but now it's going to be all of our colleagues are able to write prescriptions. The only other thing in the future is we have a very successful research project. We're only 5 weeks into it. So it won't be finished till we're 12 weeks of treatment. It's for nail fungus. And we are using CBD in combination with other essential oils and the CBD blocks the production of biofilm. So the way the nail plate gets invaded is a biofilm develops. It's just like the same thing that happens on our teeth with cavities and periodontal disease. We need to have biofilm, this structure. So CBD blocks the production of biofilm, and it blocks, it's an antimicrobial. It is a very effective antimicrobial with mycology, so with fungi. So our results are also as dramatic. They didn't say they look like chia pet, but I've been getting these photos sent to my phone, which are a little different than the ones I usually get, and of people's toenails. That, sometime during dinner, that is not the photo you want to have come across it. But the results are dramatic. I think we have 50 patients in that study. The podiatrist that is doing the study, I do the study design, and another clinician does the study. He's just blown away with the results we're getting with antifungal in toenails. So as usual, I'm pretty short with getting these out. Here's some of my papers. You're welcome to take a picture of that. I assume this is going to be available wherever Gene is. And there will be a couple more coming out in the next year. We really are knocking the research out. And I think that's about it. And we'll do questions after.
I think, Dr. Smith, you need to update your picture in the bio.
I had a beard and hair in that one.
All right. How many of you consider yourself foodies? So it's the taste, color, and the aroma of the food that attracts you, correct? How does those same qualities gets incorporated in cannabinoids? Let's hear about that from Dr. Harry Behzadi. Dr. Behzadi.
No, thank you very much for having me today again. This is the third time I'm presenting. I guess I didn't do that bad the last couple of times. They invite me back. But maybe a fourth or fifth conference that I'm attending, Florida Medical Cannabis Conference. And it's amazing. Every time I come and I've seen it, how we find more use for this planet. And we see that with the hair and the skin. Now I'm going to throw another curveball at you guys to talk about flavonoids. And it baffles me. How did we get this plant, made it illegal for 70 years, and imagine what the life would be if it was legal, all along. But anyway, so I'm talking about flavonoids today. We talk about cannabinoids, we talk about terpenes. Today we're going to talk about flavonoids. What are the flavonoids, first of all? Flavonoids are part of a larger group of chemical compounds called polyphenols. And you find them in the plants, in the fruits, in the vegetable. We have about 4,000 different flavonoids in nature, and they are responsible for the color, smell, and the flavor of the fruits and vegetables. Flavonoids, oops, sorry, I didn't even, oops, yeah, that's for the, flavonoids they're anti-cancer, they're anti-inflammatory, they're antioxidant, antimicrobial properties. As we go through this presentation, we talk more about these flavonoids. In general, we can categorize the flavonoids in three groups. The first group are flavonols, we have a 3-hydroxy flavone backbones. They have antioxidant properties, and they can reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease and other medical benefits. The flavonoids that include this category are the camphorol, quercetin, and you could find them in onions, lettuce, berries, grapes, kale, tomato, and apple. So as you see, you find it in various vegetables and fruits. The next type are the flavonoids. They're aromatic, they're ketones, and they can get rid of the damaged cells. It helps with the natural, regrowing the cells, protecting against cancers, reduce the cholesterol, and has, again, anti-inflammatory properties. As you see, when you talk about the cannabis plant, you have these anti-inflammatory properties in cannabinoids, you have it in terpenes, now you have it in the flavonoids. And then the next one is the isoflavonoids. These are phenolics. They have a mechanism in the metabolism and the hormonal balance. And there are type of them are retinoids, isoflavonoids, and they could be found in the soybean, lentils, fava beans, chickpeas, pistachio, peanuts, and potatoes. Now, when you talk about cannabis plants, actually we find there are some different flavonoids are pretty much unique to cannabis plant. You could very rarely find them in nature. The type of flavonoids we're talking about is the Flavonoids A, Flavonoids B, and Flavonoids C. Flavin A and B, they were first identified back in 1980s, and Flavin C was identified in 2008. Studies have shown Flavin A again has an how do I get back? Flavin A has anti-inflammatory properties, and some studies have shown that it is actually stronger, 30 times stronger than aspirin. Flavin B and C, they have anti-inflammatory properties, antifungal, antioxidant, and anti-cancer potential. So maybe when we are talking about the CBD or any of the cannabinoids with helping with the hair growth, maybe flavonoids has something to do with it too. We don't know. We might need to do more research. But when we start talking about cannabinoids, one phrase I want to bring it to everybody's attention is the entourage effect. What is the entourage effect, basically? All these chemicals that you find in the cannabis plant, it brings us the entourage effect for you. Cannabis plants has about 100 different phytocannabinoids, and all these phytocannabinoids, we have listening all day to it, is affecting the endocannabinoid system. The late Professor Raphael Mechalom and Shimon Ben Shabbat from Israel first made a case for the whole plant synergy back in 1998. Basically, two of the most, we've been talking all day about it, two of the most common cannabinoids we always talk about it is CBD and THC. And some studies have shown that both CBD and THC can have better effects if it is used, actually it's combined with some of the smaller compounds called the terpenes and or terpenoids. And this actually, so this was all through the years, the entourage effect was always cannabinoids and terpenes. Now we're going to bring another phrase, the flavonoids, as a part of the entourage effect too. Now, we have various types of the entourage effect, actually. We have cannabinoid and cannabinoids entourage effect. Some of the presentations earlier, they talk about that the THC and CBD, they can have the entourage effect. CBD can hamper some of the anxiety and the stressfulness aspect of the THC. And then we have a THC and CBN. THC and CBN can increase cannabinoids' natural sedative properties, and they work to help with the boost with the sleepiness. Then we have a THC and CBG. And that can, again, it tells, the CBG can tell the body to stop absorbing serotonin, and it helps with the euphoria caused by the THC. And as one of the presentation earlier talked about, that really the CBG is, we are finding more is helping with the depression, actually. Then we have the entourage effect that we get from the cannabinoids and terpenes, actually. Some of them are the pine-scented terpenes that you smell with the pinene. That's one of the terpenes that you find it in the cannabis plant, and that could, help with the contract with the compromised memory caused by the THC. Or another one is the combination of the CBD and peppery terpene, cryphylline, that could be beneficial in treatment of the addiction. Another one is the CBD and the citrus-scented terpenes, limonene, that again, that works with, that alleviate the anxiety. So it's not just the cannabinoids, some of the terpenes have, along with the cannabinoid, could have all these effects. Not the same thing with the flavonoids. Now the flavonoids have, have other entourage effect with the cannabinoids. As we mentioned, the Flavin A, could help with the anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer, antioxidant. So it's going to be, this is additional benefits of that. One of the flavonoids, which is the isomer of the canflavin B, is an isocanflavin, and that has some studies has shown it helps with the pancreatic cancer and has some effect on the breast cancer. Now we started seeing actually some of the cannabinoids with the nutraceutical and the vitamins actually. We started seeing product out there that actually they are combination of the CBN and melatonin that helps you with the sleep disorder. Or you see products of CBD and amino acid called L-theanine that helps you to calm you down, to relax you. And so various, in the next, I think, very near future, you are going to start seeing other vitamins and botanicals actually, how the effects of them is going to be combined that have that entourage effect with cannabinoids. It is estimated by 2028, the whole cannabis nutraceutical could be projected, could be as much as $19 billion industry. Now, since we are a laboratory and we test, the way we test the flavonoids, we use the LC-MS. Jini talked earlier about how we tested pesticide. This is just a brief introduction how we analyze the flavonoids. Flavonoids are, using LC-MS. The LC, the HPLC separates the different flavonoids, then it gets into the triple quad mass spec, which the first mass spec is going to fragment it, send it to the ion collision cell, the second quadrupole, and to make it into the fragments and ions, and then send it to the third quadrupole, which is filters it, and to the detector, gets detected. Now, the fun part here is that since we are a laboratory and we had access to some, medical marijuana and different flowers, some vapes, we started testing these things for cannabinoids, for terpenes, and flavonoids. The first thing we did is we started testing some of the flowers actually, and what you see here is the blue line is the concentration of the cannabinoids in the flowers, total cannabinoids in flower. The red line is the terpenes, and the gray line is the flavonoids. One thing we find, we didn't find any correlation between the potency or an amount of the flavonoids or the terpenes. It's very random. It depends on it depends on the cultivar. But one thing was very interesting, that in every sample we analyzed, we did find canflavin A and B. So this is something that you are going to have that. You're going to have that canflavin A and canflavin B in every flower sample. So this is an added benefit that you are getting if you're smoking the flower actually. You have that in addition to the terpenes, you automatically are going to get that canflavin A and B. The next step, we started testing actually some keef samples, and then they find the same thing. Nothing happened to the flavonoids. There was no relationship. But one of the things that we find that the terpenes was about a much lower concentration. That could have been due to the way they actually process the keef samples. Then we take that one step further, and we started taking some of the inhalable products, some of the vape product. Again, we didn't see any kind of relationship between the amount of the potency, the cannabinoids, the terpenes, and flavonoids. Flavonoids and terpenes. The terpenes, I got to put the exclamation here. Sometimes they add the extra terpenes to the inhalable products, so not necessarily it's true here. Now, the fun part was actually we were getting overwhelmed with all this. We talked about it. Dr. Rosado talked about it earlier, about all these, I call it exotic cannabinoids or synthetic cannabinoids, whatever you want to call it, all this delta 8, delta 10, HHC, THCP. One of the things that we did, it says, okay, let's try those and let's see, what do we get? One thing that we find that terpenes didn't affect it. This is the idea. This is the potency on these things. Obviously, in each case, we were analyzing not for delta 9, for the delta 8 or delta 10. But one thing we find that the terpenes was there. It didn't affect any of the terpene. But when you analyze them for flavonoids, we didn't find any flavonoids. So what's going on here? Zero, zilch, nothing. So what happens here is, as we discussed earlier this morning, the way they synthesize these exotic or synthetic cannabinoids, they're using a lot of acids, they're using a lot of different chemicals. And these chemicals, they react with all the polyphenols and they convert them to other compounds. So not only that you are adding, when you're taking these exotic or synthetic cannabinoids, not only you're adding, it's not tested enough. You're adding all this chemical to your body, and you don't have the benefit of getting any of these flavonoids. Now, in the next couple of slides, I want to talk a little bit about some of the clinical studies that they have done on these flavonoids. Obviously, we need a lot more research to be done. This was done with a good client of ours that they are actually making flavonoids right here in Florida, and they extract it here. And basically, what they're taking the flavonoids is derived from the hemp plant. They extract it. They're using different processes of extraction, such as solvent extraction, hydro extraction, supercritical extraction. And the most abundant flavonoids that they find, in addition to campflavin A and B, is apigenin, luteolin, and coumarin, actually. And each one of these flavonoids have exhibit an antiviral, antibacterial, antioxidant, and anti-inflammatory properties. And there have been a neuroprotective effect, including conjunctive improvement. Now, one of the first studies was done, actually, they used the hempflavin with a proprietary blend of 23 different campflavin, actually. And what they did is they gave it to 65 adult patients with varying ailment, actually, with 300 microgram of the per day and 100 microgram for 10 to 30 days. And they find out actually no adverse effect, and overall positive response rate for the 90% increase and decrease in the pain was observed. So that was one of the first studies that was done on the human. The next couple of one, it was done actually, this one was done by the veterinarian doctor, and they used these cervid flavonoids. They used as flavonoids are known to be displaying an anti-parasitic properties. So what they did is Dr. Davis treated 3 lots of deer over 30 days period with 200 milligram, 400 milligram of the flavonoid compound, and we had one control one. And after 30 days, they showed, and these were all the deers that they were infested with parasites. And after 30 days, they find on the a fecal load of 0 eggs of these parasites. So as you see, this again had a very positive results using these flavonoids. The next one is again, this is another product that is made locally in Florida, and they use it as a generic flavonoid product. Again, it's a proprietary blend of the different flavonoid extract, and what they do, they make it, they call it the mud flavonoids, actually. And as you could see here, again, what we discussed about the tissue recoveries, the antibacterial, antiviral property of these things. And you see in this case in the horses, this is from October 2022 to January 2023. After applying the affected area, what kind of improvement is showing here. And again, here, another case that you see here, and this is a matter of basically 23 days after applying that flavonoid mud, how it actually the horse recovered and made it better. So some of the things that obviously we're moving the cannabis, hopefully we want to get with the rescheduling, we're going to have a lot more research done. The other thing that, again, we showed it natural versus synthetic, that not only with the natural ones, you get all the terpenes and cannabinoids, you get additional benefit of the flavonoids. And one thing I do want to bring it up is that since I have the platform and I got 5 minutes to talk, and so there is a lot of product, there is a number of products, I can't say a lot of products, there are a number of the products that are coming with these flavonoids, which has a tremendous effect. We're hearing this, it reducing size of the tumors and all that. And there is a tendency in the medical community that anything that comes from cannabis, it gets that stigma that it wants the doctors, they don't want to touch it because it's coming from cannabis. Obviously, none of the doctors here, obviously. And that is stigma, and it's all over. So camflavin A, camflavin B, if you're not going to use the cannabis plant, how are you going to get that? So that is one of the things is actually affecting the industry, that stigma. I hope we could work around it and get that stigma out of the community, that there is nothing wrong if we could get the flavonoids. And this has no THC, has no psychoactive, it's not psychoactive, it's coming from the cannabis plant. So you look at the benefits that the flavonoids have. And I'm sure we're gonna, in the next couple of years, we're gonna have a lot more research on the flavonoids, but remember when the first time you heard about this. Thank you.
I think if Dr. Behzadi invites me at his home, I won't be surprised that on the dinner table, beside the salt and pepper shaker, there will be a flavonoid shaker. What is one of the common side effects listed for all the medication that we prescribe? I'm not talking about cannabinoid. Including antiemetic, nausea. Even the antiemetics, side effect of antiemetics is nausea. So we heard earlier today, one of the side effects of cannabinoids is memory impairment. However, Dr. Kyron Tamar is going to talk to you about the flip side of it, i.e. cannabinoids and memory disorders. Dr. Kyron Tamar, thank you.
How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Kyron, and I am a first line. Oh, you show me this is the forward. I'm a retired general and vascular and trauma surgeon for 38 years, and I've been to a lot of conferences, and I know what it feels like at the end of the day. So everybody stand up and stretch. For the last, stand up and stretch. That's what I learned to do. That's what I've been taught to do. And I'll keep talking as you stretch. I'm a retired general vascular and trauma surgeon. I practiced for 38 years. I retired in 2020, but in 2016, I took the first certifying examination, which was, according to Dr. Smith and I talked about it, it was more science than public policy. And in California, you said it's a three-day course for physicians. In this country, it's how long was the course, folks? Mostly public policy. And oops, sorry, go back. How do I go back? How do I go back? This way. I want to go back. Oh, I'm going forward. I'm going to go back. Okay, here at the end. One more time. Okay. And this is the pointer. That's the pointer. No, it's the go forward. I want to go back again. Okay. Okay, let's go back one more time. Okay. Anyway, and that's the point. That's the point.
This is the back, this is the forward, this is the pointer.
Okay. I took the first zoning exam in 2016. I started working for Canna Wellness. I don't have a practice of my own. I'm an independent contractor. So I worked for Canna Wellness since August of 2020. And I've worked for MM Florida in Brooksville. Carla is the owner of MM Florida. Very few women own cannabis clinics, and women are the fastest growing demographic after people over 65 using cannabis. I've seen over 6,000 patients, not 8. And I'm not a neurologist or psychiatrist. So that's my disclaimer. I missed this day in medical school, in history class. The Chinese call cannabis the yin and yang medicine. Equilibrium, balance, homeostasis, the yin and yang medicine. How logical, analytical, and descriptive of cannabis. You've heard about the Godfather, who discovered CBD in 1964 and THC in 1965. The Godfather, the grandfather of cannabis science and research. He died last year in March. He was 93. Should have got the Nobel Prize. He got the Harvey Prize, closest thing to it. I was 15 when he discovered it. I missed that day in science class. We talked about the endocannabinoid system. CB1 receptors are on the brain and spinal cord in men and women, impacts our short-term memory, thinking, appetite. CB2 receptors are on the periphery, impacts all our organs as well as our immune system. Again, I want you to read that. CBD enhances and strengthens the efficacy of the mitochondria, the power source for every cell in our body. Everybody knows what that is. Even my patients remember that from science class. And read this too. The body produces 2 endocannabinoids in a natural process, such as an anandamide and 2-AG, that resembles the plant. From the National Institute of Health. This came out in 1988, I believe. There is no plant on the planet closer to our own chemistry, our own physiology. There's no plant better for us or more natural to us than a cannabis plant, thanks to Dr. Raphael Mechoulam. He discovered it in anandamide. There was no word for bliss in Hebrew, so he went to Sanskrit. anandamide, because cannabis stimulates or increases our dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphin. That's why it works so well. Anandamide, that's what our brain makes. I missed that day in science class too. Again, anandamide in 2-AG binds with bodies, our CB1 and CB2 receptors, presynaptic, postsynaptic. Anandamide in 2-AG, which looks just like the cannabis plant. Again, these are different, anandamide, delta-9, THC, delta-8, they are a partial CB1 agonists located in most areas of the brain, all over our brain, all over our body. Again, phytocannabinoids from homeostasis, balance, equilibrium, yin and yang. How logical. Synaptis, presynaptic and postsynaptic. It's called the four horsemen of the medical apocalypse. These are the things that most people in this country die from. Heart disease, cancer, neurodegenerative, type 2 diabetes, and metabolic syndrome. And of course, the metabolic syndrome includes insulinemia as well, and insulin resistance. The four horsemen. That's what causes disease for most people in this country. Inflammaging term came out back in 2018, inflammaging. Age-related diseases all are due to inflammation. That's why I'm so happy to be the last speaker to wrap it up about oxidative stress. It's all due to inflammation. Oxidative stress and inflammation. These are the neurodegenerative diseases that we are talking about. Most of you have heard of, all of us have heard of all of them. This is a better description: dementia type, demyelinating type, Parkinson type, motor neuron. Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, amyotrophic sclerosis, or Lou Gehrig's disease. Oxidative stress, that's what causes everything to go haywire. As we get older, age, genes, environment, medical history, lifestyle, all those things contribute to neurodegenerative disorders. Oh, by the way, the reason that I'm up here, thanks to Dr. Terrell Newton, who talked to Gene about me, and my experiences at Canna and MMK has allowed me to see over 6,000 patients. But the reason I'm standing here because Dr. Terrell selected me because my mother, her sister, and two of my mother's first cousins, all victims of Alzheimer's in my family. So it's personal for me. This is oxidative stress. That's what happens. We have been bombarded by oxidative stress. Again, oxidative stress. We talked about this throughout the entire talk, and we can't avoid oxidative stress. All these things cause oxidative stress. There's no getting around it. Again, you recognize all the, exercise, all the things that happen to us with oxidative stress. These are the things we've seen in, our biochemistry classes that we learned. Our diet is key, mitochondrial homeostasis. Again, this is what we're talking about. Neutrophil recruitment, interleukin 6, 1 through 6, tumor necrosis factor, promotion, apoptosis, all the things that mononuclear shift, PMN activation, interleukin 6 through 12, leading to, go back. Hyperphosphorylation, amyloidosis in the brain, anemia, hypercoagulation. These are the things that we studied before. We know all about this, and cannabis can slow all that down. Again, interleukin 6, cytokine storm, ARDS, lung disease, multi-organ system failure affects all the organs of our body. And this is all the things that happen to us with inflammation. This is an article that came out years ago. People think that they were saying that it's a popular theory, but it's really accepted now that beta amyloid plaques in the brain is what's responsible for Alzheimer's. But it involves the activation of the microglia. Where is it here? Microglia, which are the inflammatory cells in the brain. But clearly, there's inflammation is what's the basis for everything that goes wrong with us. Again, this is the astrocyte, which is the immune cell in the brain, the immune cell, the microglia and astrocytes. We have CB1 and CB2 receptors, which stimulate neurotransmitters to do all the things that we do, that the brain does for us. Again, activation of CB1 modulates cell activation and calcium influx. GABA, all the things that we've studied in biochemistry. Again, in the brain, you got the brain cell, the axon, and the dendrite. And this is where Alzheimer's takes place, with the tau protein destruction there and the amyloid deposition at the synapses. This is what we are talking about. The amyloid beta plaques at the periphery, at the synapses, and the disintegrating tau proteins that collect in the brain to destroy the cell, Alzheimer's brain. Again, hyperphosphorylation, tau proteins, neural death. That's what leads to Alzheimer's. And other age-related diseases, but in the brain diseases, the neurodegenerative diseases. Again, these are the risk factors. Diet, alcohol, smoking, diabetes, all these genetic predisposition, hypertension, all the things that all of us are treating as doctors. And what helps protect us is education, activity, cognitive. But I will tell you that my two uncles, they were my second cousins, but we had to call them uncle because they were older than us. That's a tradition in Caribbean country. And they were both engineers. But Alzheimer's got to them too because they probably had the two APO4 genes. Degenerative diseases is all due to destruction of the brain cells. This is what happens. Amyloid plaques, neurofibril tangles, and neurofibril inflammation are the underlying hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. I apologize for talking fast. I'm from New York. I can't help it. Again, these are the nerve-related disease. Alzheimer's, Huntington's, Chorea, Parkinson's all come from these different parts of the brain. And inflammation is the reason for most of everything that goes wrong with us. Again, Alzheimer's, beta amyloid deposits, Parkinson's, loss of dopaminergic neurons. Again, Huntington's disease, all the different areas of the brain that these neurodegenerative diseases occur. We were talking about leaky gut syndrome. This is very interesting because I didn't learn this until well into my surgical career, that the GI tract is the largest immune function in our body. It's not the spleen, it's not the liver, it's not lymph nodes. The GI tract is the largest immune function organ in our body. And we talked about translocation in surgery, how if you have high permeability, it leads to sepsis because of translocation of bacteria across the blood barrier in the GI tract. And now it's even thought that with the leaky gut syndrome, translocation of bacteria, which can cause sepsis, actually can affect the brain as well. The gut-brain axis that was talked about earlier is fascinating. It's fascinating because we are what we eat. Again, these are the symptoms of neurovascular disease: mobility, abnormal movement, swallowing, bladder and bowel function, blood pressure fluctuation, sleep, breathing, heart function, memory, cognitive ability, mood, speech. And cannabis for neurodegenerative disorders, there's lots of information. There's an overwhelming amount of information about the benefit of cannabis to treat neurodegenerative disorders, and it's right there. Okay, here we go. Mitochondria was mentioned in Dr. Terrell Newton's. You mentioned mitochondria was on one of your lists. The mitochondria, the powerhouse of every cell in our body, and I put this slide up one more time. CBD enhances the efficacy of the what? The mitochondria, the powerhouse of every cell in our body. And again, weed looks just like our own internal chemistry from the NIH, 1988. I missed that day in science class too. Or cannabinoid treatment, absolutely. Harvard-trained, board-certified geneticists found the first, and the cannabinoids offer symptomatic relief for many problematic issues with muscle spasms, pain, appetite, nausea, vomiting, neuroprotection, inflammation, oxidation, and seizures. There we go again. For treatment, let me go back on. Medical cannabis for dementia. NIH. multiple sclerosis. Lots of information, overwhelming amount of information. Again, these different studies, Alzheimer's disease, lots of small studies, improvement, 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 significant effects in reducing, improvement. This one said no improvement. That's why we need to do more studies, because the studies are flawed, because they see people that just use cannabis by inhalation. Again, there's lots of information. This is nothing new. I'm not making this stuff up. Parkinson's disease, lots of information. There's so much literature, but we need more studies, and that's why it's good that cannabis is going to Schedule III, although it should be descheduled. Again, national. Okay. There are 40,000 people still sitting in jail, over 40,000 people still sitting in jail. Okay. Pros and cons of treating cannabis and Parkinson's disease. I mean, there's so much. Even the Parkinson's Foundation believes in weed. It's just overwhelming. This company, this overseas company, and this is a company based in U.S. and Jamaica, West Indies, and they want to import cannabis extract to the United States for potential therapies for Huntington's chorea and multiple sclerosis. Again, these are the benefits. Reduce inflammation, decreases expression of pro-inflammatory cytokines, exerts antioxidant, et cetera, neuroprotection, mitochondrial dysfunction, again and again and again. There are so many references. Believe me, there's an overwhelming amount of references. I didn't know this myself. Dr. Alzheimer's is named after Dr. Alois Alzheimer's, a German a researcher who studied the brain, and Alzheimer's is named after him. I didn't know that until a few months ago. Most people don't know this. 1851, this was added to the pharmacopoeia. Insanity, where is it? Right here. Insanity was treated then. Look at all the things cannabis was treated when it was added to the pharmacopoeia in 1851. I missed that day in history class too. We talked about the patent earlier. Somebody had that patent tattooed. Well, the patent, my parents, my mother, her sister, and two uncles would have had a benefit. Alzheimer's. This was October 2001. I missed that day in history class too. Will be global epidemic by 2050. And you see, Middle East, that's what's really strange. Why is it that North Africa and Middle East is going to have the greatest increase? I don't know. Well, we're not, this country is not that far behind, but this is where you see it across the world. Over 50 million by 2020 across the world going to have Alzheimer's. And of course, how do you prevent it? Exercise, eating, weight control, avoiding this, that, and the other, maintaining healthy diet, all those things. African Americans die from all diseases at a higher rate from Alzheimer's than any other race, and African Americans die from all diseases at a higher rate than any other race American. And the problem in the African American community often is that doctors, oh, that's just aging. It's okay, don't need to do any intervention. It's just aging. They should be getting genetic testing, psychological evaluation. I got the psychological evaluation. Believe me, my brain was tired after that. It felt like a board exam I just finished. After that test, it was a good test because I was tired. Again, look at the Alzheimer's going across the rest of the world because we're living longer. In this country, people over 65 will be outnumbered people under 16 by 2050. I'm not going to be around then. I was talking to another physician. This is the Cannabis Health Index, because cannabis can treat over 200 medical and neurological conditions. Cannabis Health Index. I have the 3rd edition. And what was it noted? CBD was found to have neuroprotective, antioxidant, anti-apoptosis tonic effects against the beta and amyloid peptide toxicity. Stimulation movement negative. I mean, the evidence is there. This evidence is there. It's overwhelming. Again, psychiatric times. Older individuals with psychiatric disorders are increasingly using cannabis. The family was desperate for anything to help his cognitive decline. They heard that cannabis was a miracle cure. It didn't work. But the next patient said about using cannabis, responded equally, no, I haven't tried it, but can you get me some? Because patients want it. By the way, cannabis is on the cover of Time magazine this month. The whole issue is derived from cannabis, Time magazine. The age for older cannabis has promoted symptoms, dizziness, sleeplessness, sleepiness, and fatigue in older. Are they beneficial? Of course. Again, clearance of beta amyloid peptides from the brain, Alzheimer's disease. I got sent to Facebook jail for posting this, Carla. You know that, right? I got put in Facebook jail. But it's true. There we go, right there. Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, all the things it does, because it's an antioxidant, anti-inflammatory. Look at number 18. What does it say? Neuroprotective, CBD. But it's even more protective when the rest of the team, because it's called the entourage effect. There is no I in team. CBD, but this is all the different components that we heard about earlier. CBN for sleep. This is for inflammatory bowel disease and diabetes and all the different things. Look at all the things that cannabis treats. And again, neuroprotective, CBD. But you need THC too, because they work together as a team to do all those things together. CBG, the mother of all cannabinoids. You heard that earlier. I'm taking extra CBG because I have Alzheimer's, and my mother, her mother had 2 uncles, and my father had prostate and rectal cancer, and it's in hemp. You can buy it off, you can get it from hemp farms. You don't get it from dispensary, because if you get on the certificate of analysis link on the website of each dispensary, it's only 1%, 2%, 3% CBG. You want more CBG? Order it online. It protects the brain, CBG. And as well as the other parts of the body. Again, removes the amyloid plaques, okay? We're gonna go a little faster. The brain, here we go again. Okay, diet, exercise, Alzheimer's, clearly there's a relation to what we eat. And there's thoughts that we gotta change our diet and exercise in order to prevent it. Ginseng has been around for thousands and thousands of years. Ginseng helps memory. The Chinese knew what they were doing. Anti-inflammatory foods. This is what American diet is. That's why we see these things going wrong in our diabetes, hypertension, cardiac disease, cerebral vascular disease. These are didn't our ancestors told us to eat our fruits and vegetables? Why? Because they're high in antioxidants. This is what we should be eating. Antioxidant foods, fruits and vegetables. Plant-based diet, try it, because it has benefits. Essential Mediterranean diet, the mind diet, mind interventional neurological today is what we eat. And you gotta look at the benefit of, you gotta tell patients, advise them, not just the cannabis, advise them to eat properly, exercise, do all the things that help prevent the ketogenic diet. There's so much information as how you can prevent cannabis. Look at complementary treatments. Alternative medicine offers alternative treatments. Conclusions, again, to be a significant new therapeutic. Anybody? Again, this is Florida Can. Where cannabis, there is an improvement in all these things. That's why people over 65 are the greatest demographic segment using weed. Neurological disorders. Anybody heard of Carl Sagan? Thank you. I have to say to young people, do you know who Neil deGrasse is? Oh yeah. I said, well, this was his teacher. The longest running PBS program on Cosmos. The Cosmos, origin of the universe, life on other planets. He wrote an article under the Mr. X alias, because he said it helped him with his ideas music and art appreciation. He said it helped him with sex, too. The greatest scientist of the 20th century. This is the picture of the plant. You see this, these little crystals? See the little white crystals? Yes? No? You see them all? That's where everything comes from. This is a beautiful plant. The Creator put it on earth for us. Because cannabis is anti-aging, anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, restorative, and protective. That's why I'm 5'9" when I used to be 5'10". From the inflammatory cytokines, the free oxygen radicals, the interleukin 1 through 6, and the tumor necrosis factor. And cannabis slows down the slow burn that none of us escapes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, panel members, in showing that as long as we keep our cannabinoid products safe, our patient will be more beautiful, will be finer food connoisseur, and will have sharper memories in the future. With that, we have about 15 minutes for questions. I hope you wrote down your questions, and we'll get started with that. There's one there. Yeah, can somebody bring the microphone to her? While that is waited, I have a question for Ms. Glaros. The safety testing requirement, is it applied only for the product dispensed out of the dispensary, or does it apply to the over-the-counter product also?
So, I can project. This one on? Okay. So with that, there are regulations surrounding hemp and CBD products. However, the testing regulations are not as stringent, and there's a lot of loopholes through those. So producers have found ways to only test for things like cannabinoids rather than looking at contaminants. And we know that hemp products that CBD is made from is grown primarily outdoors. And because cannabis and hemp, they are the same plant, one just is predominantly CBD, one is just predominantly THC. And it's grown outdoors, it's a bioaccumulator. There's a lot of concerns of contaminants, and so my personal opinion is to caution people to using hemp products without seeing if it has been tested, because most hemp providers are not doing that stringent testing that the cannabis products are required to be tested for.
I can also add that the MMTCs, they cannot move the medical marijuana unless it's passed by the laboratory. They cannot move it even to dispensary. So everything has to be tested and passed before they even move it to the dispensary. So that's the precaution. And you don't have that with any of the CBD products.
But what about the products that are sold in the smoke shop and the convenience stores?
Absolutely, there is nothing there.
Yeah, that would be the
zero.
I want to make a point.
All right. So the question there.
So we know that Alzheimer's is more than just memory loss, right? You have the memory loss, the decrease in ADLs, probably have a decrease in IADLs, et cetera, et cetera. So that's Alzheimer's. Now with cannabis and THC, one of the effects that we see is memory loss, depending on the dose, the amount, the length of use, and all of these things. So putting those two together, is there anything to help with Alzheimer's and still maintain some amount of memory?
I didn't hear the entire question.
Can you repeat the question with the microphone a little bit?
I didn't hear the question very well.
The memory loss with Alzheimer's and the memory loss that people have with extended use of THC, is there any way to combat the memory loss for the Alzheimer's population?
Well, let me just say this. There's no question that if you use, and this is the problem in the cannabis industry, young people want just flower. THC alone will affect and cause memory loss. You have to use more CBD during the day to protect your brain, more THC at night to rest, repair, renew, and regenerate. And yes, it can contribute to memory loss. That's why they say young children shouldn't be using a lot of THC. It will inhibit brain development. And that's why young people who use THC a lot, they end up getting a prefrontal dementia in their 40s and 50s. So if I understand your question properly, what I advise all my patients, more CBD during the day to focus, concentrate, do all your daily activities, go to school, get good grades, and more THC at night to rest, repair, renew, and regenerate. If it's not working for you during the day, CBD, give more CBD or more THC. At nighttime, if it's not working, more THC or more CBD. And let me just say this too. As we know, a lot of elderly patients cannot handle the high from THC. So you give more CBD or more THCA to lower the psychoactive component. And by the way, there's a great resource that I've used. It's at Florida A&M University in Tallahassee. They have a program, Medical Marijuana Education and Research Initiative. Get on their website. It has a tremendous amount of information. I just learned about it in November 2023. It's been around for 4 years, state mandated. The only college campus that I know of that has a medical marijuana education and research initiative to educate the community.
Hi.
I answered your question.
Hi, thanks. You were just speaking a moment ago about memory loss, Alzheimer's, and varietals. You don't see it that much anymore, but there was a varietal Jack Herrera years ago, had a nice balanced amount of THC, but it didn't have myrcene, which tends to block memories and cause memory impairment, and that's one of the problems with the modern plant. Might be good for PTSD, but not for recall, so it's not necessarily good with work productivity if you can't remember what the boss told you. But for memory impaired patients, Jack Herrera was noted because it had a very high level of pinene. And pinene, as a terpene, because you were talking about terpenes earlier, tended to offset the memory impairment that THC even a la carte causes. And that was a very important finding. The problem is, though, the dominant genetics in pretty much all the modern plants you have across the country today are descendants of Afghani Kush #1, discovered in 1973. It's in Kandahar. And it's a plant that has lots of THC and genetic dominance for lots of myrcene, again, causing the impairment. And it's hard to find plants today that don't have those dominant genetics for one simple reason. That plant was really unique as the typical indica of the day because it's a 4 to 5 foot squatty plant. And back in 1973, when it discovered, it was the darling of breeders across the world, but particularly in Northern California, because a 4 to 5 foot squatty plant is easy to hide from a helicopter. And no, that's the reality of it, because remember, cannabis is not a 4 to 5 foot plant normally. Hemp's 20 plus feet in one short growing season. So I don't know if you're aware of other pinene-rich varietals, but as a terpene that naturally has ways of offsetting memory impairment, you might want to look into that for Alzheimer's.
Side note regarding the Alzheimer's, I know this is a CME program. I am going to mention a medication that is being studied in Puerto Rico. It's called Hyalalex. Hyalalex is a combination of cannabis, turmeric, and melatonin. And they're utilizing that for Alzheimer's patients, particularly the melatonin for the sundowning syndrome, the cannabis for neuroplasticity, and then the turmeric because of the anti-inflammatory component. So understanding it's a CME, I'm not promoting a product. I get disclaimer, I don't get any money from them. I just know about that product. Being that my ancestors are from Puerto Rico, and like you, one more thing I share with you, I have a very strong Alzheimer's disease pattern in my family. On my mother's side, her dad, her uncle, and on my dad's side, every one of his aunts, including his mom, all had Alzheimer's.
Thanks. I have to fulfill one of my roles. Charlene, I'll be honest with you. I'm not going to let that memory loss discussion go without discussion. I don't buy it. Way too many people that I know have used way more cannabis than I have used, okay, are older than me, sharp. They're sharp as a tack. I see them in my clinic every day. There's no doubt, okay, that we don't want our young people overusing their cannabis. That's obvious. That's why we're doctors. That's why we speak that message. But for my adult patients that use cannabis every day, that have always used cannabis every day, I'll be honest, I have not noticed, okay, memory loss. And, you know, we can talk Willie Nelson all we want, or Tommy Chong all we want. It's always going to be individualized. And Kamar, I was interested in your talk to the extent of what really defines Alzheimer's in this particular day and age, to the extent that when I went to med school, it was always kind of defined as pre-senile dementia, right? So Pat Summitt, who was the Tennessee basketball coach, I think is the best known recent example of somebody who in their young 50s, okay, developed that type of dementia and was done with coaching and was dead within 3 or 4 years because of the loss of ADLs and other such things. That to me has always been Alzheimer's. To me, if I'm 80, do I still want to root for the Guardians? Used to be the Indians. Do I want to still be working if I want to? Of course. But to a certain extent, I think there is an acceptance, you know, of aging, and I know we have aging specialists here that are trying to prevent all of that. I'm all about it, you know, and I try to eat better and this and that and whatever, but I'm 68, and I lived an ER life, and I've used cannabis pretty consistently throughout my adult life. I believe I can go back into the ER tomorrow and remember every single dose that I used to use, and I haven't done an ER shift in 9 years. So my point is, I don't buy it. So until more research shows that, and I just wanted to make one other comment. If I'm in a nursing home environment with dementia, and I tell my caregivers this, I want 3 things. I want to be hungry, I want to be happy, and I want to be sleepy.
Amen.
And if they're putting a patch on every single patient who enters a nursing home environment just to do a trial, to see if that's going to enhance their daily living. I mean, to me, patches, creams, the tinctures, you know, I'm not asking to smoke, you know, a joint in my hospital bed, but those are the type of things that we need to consistently work on as a physician community to make sure that they're being accepted in that hospital environment.
In Israel, all nursing home patients get cannabis. And I want to say that the parting words I give to all my patients, I want everybody to say it, UMW. Repeat after me, UMW. Use more weed. Routes, strains, and ratios, like our ancestors did. Stay meditative and medicated.
I just want to add, and I don't know if Dr. Rosado can back me up, maybe the largest and one of the most important researches in Alzheimer's is happening in Colombia right now. There is a phenomenon with a family that starts, there's a gene in that family for centuries, right? They start getting Alzheimer's at the age of 21, correct, Dr. Rosado? And they are doing the largest study with medical marijuana usage. In terms of, in the United States, we talk about, you know, marijuana and everything comes from California, but we're not talking about Israeli strains marijuana. We're not talking about marijuana that comes from Colombia, and there's specific strains that can't probably treat. And it is a hotbed in that particular area in the study of Alzheimer's. And there's a lot of breakthrough. So Alzheimer's, we need to also look at abuse to answer your question.
By the way, Israel, of course, because of Dr. Rafi Mashoudam, leads the world in cannabis research. And there are 6 countries, Uruguay, Czech Republic, Switzerland, I forgot, but there are 4 countries that lead the world in cannabis research, and Israel has led the world for 70 years.
We are almost at the end of the session. I have a quick question for Dr. Smith. Dr. Smith, the effects of cannabinoids on skin and hair follicle that you mentioned, mostly with the topical, have you had any observation of the same with systemic administration, whether it is orally, rectally, or otherwise?
Yeah, good question. No, I've not done any systemic research. It's very hard to get FDA registration. So all of this research will be FDA registered medications eventually, and it's very hard to get systemic registrations, but you get topical registrations very easily.
Any anecdotal observations?
I live off anecdotal observations. I've been taking notes this whole conference of what's my next research going to be about.
Last question.
Actually, my question for Dr. Smith as well. We can end it kind of piggybacking off of you. When you're saying that you're using CBD topically, is it just a pure oil? Is it formulated with CBD? Or what is being used when it's being done topically with hair, fungal, or skin?
Another good question. So with CBD, I've used a wonderful whole plant extract that is consistent from year to year. The COAs have been consistent year to year, so I knew what I was dealing with. When it came to THCV, I used isolate, and I created an entourage of fake hemp oil because there is really no true high THCV hemp oil out there. Just the nature of how THCV is manufactured within the plant, you have to have a lot of THC. So to have a hemp oil that's high in THCV, it's got to have a high, so it won't be hemp oil, it'll be marijuana. So I created my own Frankenstein hemp oil high in THCV.
Thank you.
I use fermented MCT for almost all of my topicals, fermented MCT. It makes it much more watery-like, less oil-like.
Thank you very much. Enjoy your evening and sleep tight. We will be learning more tomorrow.